Hi everyone, welcome back to the new City Catechism series on Understand the Bible. And this week we are thinking about what God asks of us in the law, what God requires of us. Not a particularly popular topic, but it's one where I think a lot of people think very wrongly about this. And it's important to think rightly about what God requires of us. You remember in the last session, in session 6, we were thinking about how we glorify God. And part of that is just by loving him and enjoying him and knowing that he's for us, that he's good, and obeying him is part of that, knowing that his laws are good for us. And really we're going to be picking up on that theme again in this video, just more specifically focusing on obeying. And by the way, if you want to watch the previous one, then I'll put the link up there and you can just click on that and go back and then come back and watch this one if you like. Now, what comes into your mind when you think about the law? Do you think maybe The Clash? Is the image in your mind a positive one or a negative one? You know, I think a lot of people have got quite conflicting ideas about the law. I think some people have a view that the law is basically there to stop us doing anything that we really want to do. I remember when I was younger, I remember a slogan, anything enjoyable in life is illegal, immoral or fattening. And when I was younger, I had that on a sort of tea tray thing, amongst other things. Don't ask. But the point is that I think a lot of people have that view that the law is there to stop us doing, really enjoying life. Because if we really wanted to enjoy life, we'd throw off the shackles of the law and we'd just do what we wanted to do. Now, that is the wrong idea. And actually, if you want a video about this particular topic, have a look at my video about freedom, which I just did yesterday, in fact. And I'll put, again, the link up there for you. But what does the law require? Now, this is what this catechism question is about. Question number 7. Is the law a good thing or not? What does the law of God require? Personal, perfect and perpetual obedience, that we love God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength, and love our neighbour as ourselves. What God forbids should never be done, and what God commands should always be done. So let's go through this bit by bit. We start out with personal obedience. So first of all, God doesn't want us to simply obey a kind of arbitrary black and white set of rules, but rather he wants us to obey him in relationship. So it's a bit like children obeying their parents. Rather than children simply being expected to obey every last thing that the parents say, it's rather that in relationship with them, they should listen to them and listen to what they say. But because of that relationship, not just simply having a relationship, an impersonal relationship with a set of rules. So that's the thing, that it's a personal obedience. We obey God because we relate to him as our Father in heaven. And it's because it's that loving relationship that we obey. And that comes first. And that needs to come first. And our obedience must spring from that. It's really important that we're not just simply obeying a black and white set of rules which we have no relationship with, but we are obeying a person, and we are obeying someone who loves us and who wants our good. Really, really important to remember that first and foremost when it comes to the law. Personal, perfect and perpetual obedience. So it's not the case that we can kind of occasionally God lets us off the hook and lets us have a bit of disobedience now and then, but rather God requires perfect and perpetual, all the time, 100% obedience. And we'll come on to that sounds like a tall order, and it is a tall order. It's impossible for us, in fact. And as we go through this, we'll come to the good news. But let's just leave that stand at the moment, as that's what God requires in the law. And we'll think later on about how we actually achieve that. Now, many times I think people think about the law in negative terms. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do that. That's certainly part of things, but that's not how it's put actually in the Bible and how they pick up on it here. It says that we love God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength, and love our neighbour as ourselves. This is actually just picking up from the words that Jesus says in the Gospel. Someone asked him a question, what's the most important commandment? And this is basically what he answers with. Now think about this for a second. Jesus doesn't say that the greatest commandments are to not do something. He says that the greatest commandments are to do something. So obeying God is not a matter of not acting, but a matter of acting rightly. So let's take a concrete example. Think of the commandment about murder, okay? Do not commit murder. Do not take the life of someone else. Now, you could obey that command by sitting in a room and never talking to anyone else and just saying, well, I never want to give myself the opportunity to get angry with someone else. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lock myself away, never speak to anyone else, and I'll never murder them because I'll never actually be able to. I'll just be away from them. Well, that in a sense will be fulfilling that command. But is that, when you think about love, is that fulfilling the command to love them? And the answer is no, of course it isn't. And that's the thing, that the commands of God are to love, to do, to act. Not to act wrongly, but to act rightly. Now, it's not enough just to stop acting wrongly. We need to positively move on to acting rightly. And this is a really fundamental and an important thing to grasp about the commandments. It's not all about thou shalt not. It's about thou shalt do what is right. And that's what it's saying in the last part of the commandment as well. It says in the Catechism, what God forbids should never be done. And I guess that's what most people would think of. What God forbids, adultery, murder, all of those kind of things shouldn't be done. But what God commands should always be done. We should always be seeking to actively obey God, to love him and to love others. That's what we should be doing, not shutting ourselves away so that we never disobey God, but rather seeking to actively love him and actively love others. It's an active obedience, if you like, rather than a passive lack of disobedience, if that kind of helps. We need to love rather than just not love. If that kind of, I don't know if that makes any sense. Anyway, We'll be thinking about this as we go through the Ten Commandments. We're coming up onto the Ten Commandments, and we'll put this into, hopefully this will make a bit more sense as we go through the Ten Commandments and see how this kind of works out in the Ten Commandments. There's just one other thing that I wanted to say on this, and it's about loving God, which is that the first most important commandment is to love God. Sometimes I think we have this view that people are basically good, and the most important thing is how we treat each other. And of course, it's really important how we treat each other. But what's more important is how we treat God. And someone who seems to live a reasonably good and moral life, and yet doesn't acknowledge God, doesn't acknowledge him as Lord, and so on, they're not living a good and moral life, because they're not doing what God wants us to be doing. God wants us to live our whole lives with him as part of it, with him in the picture, praying to him every day, asking for his help every day, seeking his will in every situation, wanting him just to be daily part of our lives and let him guide us, help us and lead us, all of those things. You can't live a good and moral life without that. That is very much part of what God is requiring of us in the law, and we'll think particularly about that in the first two commandments. So I hope that this video has been helpful for you and has kind of piqued your interest for the next part of the Catechism as we move on to think about about the commandments, the Ten Commandments in particular. So thank you very much for watching this. Please do remember that the discussion is available on the Understand the Bible website, understandthebible.uk/discussion. Please do continue. If you've got any questions, that's a good place to go. And please do have a look at that website and the playlist for the rest of these New City Catechism videos. This is part of a series, and you can see the rest of them there, especially if you're joining new for this one. So thanks very much for watching, everyone, and I hope to see you again for another video very soon. God bless.